Well, this is where I live. I live in Shelton, Washington, on the shores of South Puget Sound. We're about 50 miles west of Seattle, about 25 minutes north of Olympia. This is probably why I don't like to leave very often. I just don't like to travel. That's my studio over there, which is way too big. I got too much stuff in it. Got the motorhome out right now. We're going down to Salem. Going to be down there for a week, and then you can see my wood mess over there. We have a day it's not raining today, which we've had more than our share this year. So there's my beach. I have raised clams and oysters out there. And if you notice out here on this little island, I have some mushrooms out there. They're made out of glass. Glass blower friend of mine made those. Little garden spot. Okay, now we're up on the deck. A little different view from up here. We're a little bit higher. You can see from up here, this is another reason why I don't like to leave. This is our outdoor living space in the summertime. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner are out here. Okay, Larry says we're ready to go. So I'm going to cover this bench here because I get a lot of inquiries off my website of people, wow, where'd you get that bench? Well, so the history of this bench is I built this bench probably 35, 40 years ago. And I just wanted something that would be quite heavy and last me a long time. And essentially, I made a good portion of my living off this bench. So it's, when I moved here from Enniclaw 13 years ago, it has a real history with me, and it's probably overbuilt a little bit. This is half-inch plate down here. It's quarter-inch plate here. You can see all the corners are gusseted. It's got 3-inch pipe legs. It's got feet on the bottom of it. I have a big vise mounted here, and I can have another big vise mounted here, so I could clamp things in between here. I had a water truck business, so we did a lot of pipes and stuff that were froze up, and some of these other things on here were fixtures where I could clamp things on to like rotate engines or transmissions and whatever. So this bench is very, very important in my life. So I've had several inquiries of just people, what's the history of this and why is it what it is. So that's pretty much it. And like a lot of people say, you can kind of judge a person when you see his workbench. Well, I'm just going to let you guys digest that. I'm not going there, you know. But for whatever it's worth, that's what this bench is, and that's why it is made the way it is. I have my oxygen acetylene here. You can see, because this is kind of the steel area of my work. I also attach all my jigs on here for when I bend the steel for my hollowing tools. The torch is wrapped up on hinges over there. You see the clamps along this edge. That's the way I used to keep it in the old days, so I left it there. On this end, there's hooks down here where I got my welding leads hung off from it. It's a little bit messy down underneath, but that's just out of sight, out of mind, I guess. And other things are hung here that I use all the time. So that's the story of Dave's bench. Okay, so this station over here is a sharpening station I use for sharpening a lot of the tools that I make. I also have a 10-inch grinder down there that has a CBN wheel on it. We don't have it on this camera, but we don't have it on the shop. But I also use that. I have a 10-inch CBN wheel on it. It's a 1725. I sharpen a lot of tools on that, but these are both high-speed grinders here because when I'm doing 40, 50 gouges, I just can't take the time that it takes on a slow-speed grinder. These are just kind of sitting here on this bench, which is probably not the most stable thing in the world, but they're kind of cool to watch these run at high speed. These grinders are, these are 1 horsepower. They do a nice job. They still have a 5/8 arbor on it, but I have all different kinds of setups here that I use. Some of these are homemade platforms that I use. I have several of these that are different settings. But anyway, that's the station that if you bought a tool from me, it's a good chance to come off one of those grinders right there. Okay, so I'm back here at my lathe, and a lot of people have watched the demonstrations and the videos on my website about my lathe, and not all of it shows there. There's probably reasons why. My wife would probably prefer that I didn't show it at all, because it's not the most sanitary looking thing in the world, but it does work extremely well for me. All the pieces that you see on my website were made on this lathe. So I've had inquiries, well, could you give me a little tour of your lathe? Because it is a little bit different. So I'll give you a little history and a little bit tour of it. There was several reasons why I wanted to build my own lathe. Main reason is because that's just who I am. But I always wanted a lathe that I could work back here behind the chuck and not have the headstock in the way. So that's part of the reason that I built this lathe here this way. And these are what's called dual helio cut bearings. They're basically used on large conveyor systems. On the end of a conveyor system, when you think of a conveyor system, think of all the weight that's on a belt. So these bearings are pretty stout. There's 2 sets of tapered bearings in there like this. And so with this type of a headstock that I have here, if I'm doing deep, long things, I can actually, with these 2 nuts here, I can tighten up the preload on this, and it gets really tight. And so that's part of the reasons why I did that. I have all my stuff kind of hung here where I need it, my calipers. This is for my face plates or any of my vacuum chucks, so I have it very available to me. This box here is filled with sand, and down underneath here there's, I'm going to move around over here. You can see the size of the eye bolts that are on this. They're quite big. And underneath here I have steel casters. You can see the casters there, so I can raise those eye bolts and move it around. There is a 3-inch pipe plug up here where I fill this with sand. There's another plug down below so that I can drain it. It has all the features of a standard lathe. It has forward, reverse, like any lathe. Well, like the modern lathes do. It is a variable speed. And I have a double set of pulleys here, so I have 2 speeds. So I can go from 40 up to about 2500, which I don't feel that I need anymore. I used to do a little bit of outboard turning. I built this set of ways here. And I had a set of ways like this attached to this end of the lathe. And seeing as how they were just welded up by not being very accurate, they weren't that accurate. So I was at a place over in Auburn that most of us out here in the Northwest are very familiar with. It was called Equipment Sales and Surplus, and they had a 4224 Powermatic that got tipped over in the warehouse, and it broke the headstock off down here. You can see where it broke the casting out here. So I happened to be talking to, I think it was Neil over there, and he said they had one in the warehouse because I was asking for a set of ways, and so I purchased this from them, and it came with the tailstock. There was no headstocks or bearings or anything, and I really didn't need that. The wires were just kind of hanging out over here, so I did buy that, and it's done a great job. I attached it to my headstock ways up there, and so then I built a box here, ran the wires over here, and the one thing I do like about this style of box, if you ever want to stop the lathe, it just has a big red button. That also turns it on. Then I have another stop down here, which is kind of nice to have, because when if something goes bad on the lathe, you want to know right where the stop button is. So I think a big button is a good thing to have on a lathe. And the thing I found out, what I did is I reversed this when I put it on my lathe. This is where the headstock normally set. And that's a cool advantage to that, in the respect that if I take this tailstock down here and I want to take it off, I just lift it out of the hole. And you don't have to slide it off the end. So something for lathe manufacturers to think about. Put a hole down there. A pretty simple cure for all that issue. So, and back here, I drilled and tapped a couple holes, and I made this bracket, so I got all my tools lined up here. I have marked for when I do bowls, because I have a number 1 and a number 2, and then the fingernail grinds, and then my shorter things that the shorter tools that I use for finish work or putting tendons on. It works out quite well for me. The one thing, when this lathe got tipped over, this handle got bent right here. You can see how it wobbles a little bit. And I was going to take this off and fix it, take it apart, straighten it out. But then a lot of my friends and maybe my wife also said it kind of matches me. It's a little off center. So it still works really well. So it's just part of what this lathe is now. So I just kind of leave it there like that. I'm sure some guys out there it would bother them immensely. Doesn't bother me that much because it's kind of who I am, a little off center and a little cockeyed. So this is my dust collection system. A lot of people ask me what this is and how it is. I think in some of the videos you can see it and some you can't. It's basically I can move this wherever I want and however I want. And what I have is I have a Cyclone dust collector out there in the other part of my building, and I have the control for it right here. So I can turn it on right here. And I'll shut that back off so you can hear me. And what that does, it allows me to catch the dust right here rather than after it's escaped and gone somewhere, because I can get these really, really close to where I'm working. And the other thing I have, this is a remote control. I have a ceiling mounted dust collection system above here, and I always turn that on. The thing I like about this one also, it has a timer on it, so when I'm done down here working, I can set the timer for a couple hours, and then it automatically shuts off, and it helps clean the air. The hood on the end of it there, we'll see if Larry gets a shot of it.
Sure.
There's a plywood hood that I built on the end of it there that's not part of that air filtration system. And the reason that's on there is in the wintertime, then it gathers any of the heat that's up above and actually blows it back down here, which is kind of handy. I like that system because it's got 3 speeds on it, and it just seems to work for me. So that's just something to think about. It takes all the fine stuff out of the air. Also, I do have a vacuum chuck on here. I use a vacuum chuck a lot. This is my adapter for my vacuum chuck. It's probably not what you see in the catalogs. What this is off one of my porta powers actually. It's just when you have a porta power, you have a pump back here, goes to a jack, so you want the hose to rotate. It's what I happen to have around here at the time, so that's what I used. My vacuum gauge here is a big gauge. It actually come out of my Mac Tools test equipment, because I used to do a lot of repair of equipment, so they always had a lot of vacuum things on it, so you had to have a vacuum gauge to check it. I think you'll see on there it says Mac Tools, so I'm kind of out of that phase of my life. So it's a nice big gauge. I like it. This is a wastegate here. You can purchase all this stuff that you kind of see here at any local hardware store. I do have my vacuum pump out there in that other building, but I have a switch here to turn it on and off. So you can kind of hear the vacuum there. This is my wastegate here. So I have it pretty handy, so it's easier for me to get at, it's easier for me to read, it's easy to see, it's quiet. I don't have to listen to the vacuum pump going all the time. So it's kind of an advantage to me.
And that piece of wood up there is?
Which? Oh, this piece of wood? This piece of wood is basically when I make my handles. I put this in the chuck and I put the handles here between centers. And I did that just the other day. If you look at my handles, it'll have the hose is a little bit bigger than what the actual size of the handle is. So I take that sharp edge off here. So this is just what I use that for. I do store my other stuff back here. There's some things back here. Probably shouldn't do that. Another thing, what I did here, I really like this spindle lock that I came up here with. What this is a 24 tooth chain sprocket. And I just welded a round bar around the outside of it. So I can stop this anywhere. And it works as a stop, as a spindle lock, but I also can use it for indexing. It just works for me. I have another hole down here, and so I can do different things with it. It'll space it at different, if I'm laying something out. A lot of times I just use these yellow dots on there. You can see what that does. It's on there for a specific reason for when I do fluted stuff. So that's kind of how the vacuum part of it works. What's something else I was going to talk about? What was it? Oh, this is a 3 horsepower. And when I'm corn bowls, I really like that. These marks down here that I put on my lathe, I know that would probably bother a lot of people, but when I'm corn bowls, basically this is the shortest line, each one gets longer. These are for I core with a one-way coring system. So this is the number 1 knife, it's the smallest, the number 2 knife, number 3 knife, number 4 knife. And what that is, it's set up, you can see there it says 3/4 of an inch. So when that knife is set on this, it's 3/4 of an inch from the face of this chuck. And I have both of my chucks here, the other one's stored back here. Them are the ones that I use most often. What else is there? I think that pretty much covers it. Oh, one other thing, yeah, that I do have in my shop that I think is kind of a cool thing is called I think the brand name is Echo Gate, but I think there's different ones out there. And basically what it is, when I turn a machine on, or if I do this one manually here, there are gates up here and they automatically open and close. I'll show you how that works. Okay, so what I have in here, it's a dust collection system that's out there, but I have these gates on each one of my dust ports. And if I turn on my grinder, my bandsaw, or whatever it is, these gates, that automatically closes all the gates, but it opens the one on that particular machine. Well, I have it manually set up here on my lathe. So Larry's got the camera up there on those gates, and I'm going to turn this on, and you'll see that they'll open, and the other ones in the shop will close. Now when I shut it off, which is what I did there, they're going to stay open until I go turn another machine on, and then they will close. And what this does, it does help collect all the dust where you're at that location. And I know what happens in a human's, and I did the same thing. I would walk over there and I would say, oh, well, I just got this little bit to do. It's not going to take that long. So I wouldn't go manually open and close the gates. But with this type of a system, it really does. It just automatically does it for you, you know, and I think it's a really kind of a good idea. Now, Larry, I'm going to have him switch back up there to those gates, and I'm going to go over and turn on another machine, and you will see what happens. Okay, so now I'm going to turn on my belt sander. What it did there, those gates closed. Oh.
I'm not going to be able to hear you.
Okay, I want to. So, when I manually operate it here, it turns it on, turns it off. When I'm at that belt sander, you can program this system so that it will stay on like a minute or 2 minutes after you shut the machine off. So it does also collect the dust that's around there. After you've done doing your work, whatever you're doing there. So anyway, it's something to think about. I would prefer you didn't comment too much about all my brackets and my hoses and whatever. That's just who I am. You just have to live with it. I was in a hurry when I built this place, and it's just like, you know, life's short and I'm always in a hurry. I want to show you a couple other things that I did on this lathe that you can see why it's kind of custom made for me. We'll get Larry to reposition the camera, and I'm going to cover that. Well, while I'm here, I'm going to cover these two things. These screens here I put up to control my shavings. It just contains it all in here. They're inexpensive. You can see where all the green turning is right here. I've actually wore a couple of these out because I've wore through the threads here. And then when I get to be a little bit crazy and when I want to see how high I can fling shavings, I had to add an extra little board up there. But these go up and down. I just like it because it encloses things pretty good. And the white kind of reflects the light, gives you a little bit of light. This particular light here I can move around wherever I want to get good light. And up here I have another light. I know the bulbs are dirty, but that's part of life. And I have it on a elbow up here so I can swing it out of the way. And up above that on the ceiling I have a hoist up there, so when I turn big things, I have a hoist to help me pick things up and move them up to the bench, or move them up to the lathe, excuse me. So it works pretty handy for that. I can just swing that light out of the way. I know it's not fancy, but it just works for me. So.
And I'm going to throw in my 2 cents worth on the lights that you had, on the fluorescent lights that you have here over your lathe. I would spend the $1.75 for the plastic safety sleeves that you have at any of the big box stores.
Yeah,
that'll slip on
it's a
there
good,
in case you have something fly up and it won't break. If it breaks the light, it'll stay trapped in that plastic sleeve rather than rain down on you.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea, and probably best to clean your bulbs in the backsplash once in a while too. But I like these lights. I can't remember what the number of it is, but they do kind of give a nice white light situation. So, so I think that about covers this walk around to my lathe. You can see I do have an extra sandbag here, just have to set on the motor, helps keep it quiet. I do like the quiet lathe. Some of the earlier demos I did, I had a new belt over here hanging on the wall, and I just forgot to put it on. But now the lathe, I mean, this lathe is pretty quiet. And it's nice to have the forward and reverse, especially when you're sanding and stuff like that. I know it probably doesn't match all the fancy ones out there, but it is who I am and it does work. So, thanks for taking the tour.